Hey guys, it's Sunday, January 14th, 2018. Going to go ahead and do Q&A on Sunday this week. I've been kind of flipping back and forth week to week, so bear with me here. And this week was open topics, so I got all kinds of different questions on various topics and some good ones. So I'll go ahead and dig into those. Okay, so first one, fasted glucose being elevated while being fairly lean, but A1C being fine. Possibly slower gastric emptying. Okay, so what we're talking about here is A1C being fine. So essentially, overall blood sugars are fine. That's hemoglobin A1C is referring to. And usually when I see something like this, it's what they call Dawn's phenomenon. It's just it's elevated morning fasted glucose, but if you were to check your blood glucose, say 2.5 hours, 3 hours after meals, blood glucose is perfectly fine. So the pancreatic response to the meal is fine. You're secreting the insulin. It's, everything's working like it should be, but the morning glucose upon waking is elevated. So the main reason this happens, it's actually a normal waking response. Your blood sugar is supposed to go up in the morning to an extent. You have a normal morning waking response. Cortisol goes up. Like I said, completely normal. It just tends to happen more in some people than others. Can it be a sign of insulin resistance or something along those lines? Potentially, but it's not always the case. You have to look at, and I've talked about this before, but you have to look at the different mechanisms here. At night, the liver plays a big role in controlling glucose levels also, because you're not eating food. You're not really, you're not supplying glucose. So the liver can excrete glucose as needed to maintain blood sugar levels, and obviously the insulin is also produced to kind of match those, keep your blood sugar stable. In the morning, it rises, and that's where we get that dawn phenomenon. So assume liver function's okay. There's nothing wrong with liver function. You're not other things like people that are maybe using growth hormone that's really like right upon waking and then checking it after that might see a blood sugar rise. And it can also happen in perfectly healthy people. It's not, and I'm not a doctor. I'm not, so this isn't, advice for diabetics or anything along those lines. But just keep in mind, like I said, it isn't super concerning if the glucose levels after meals is okay. Now, when I'm saying it's not super concerning, I'm saying if the levels are a little high, and we're not talking like super high, and maybe it's not even on a regular basis. What I normally have people do in this case is I like to have them check at different times and on different days. So let's say on a weekend day, maybe there's a weekend day where they get up later. Okay, so check later. Let's see what the blood sugars are what the levels are later. Normally this dawn phenomenon happens between about 4 and 8 p.m. from what I understand. So maybe check a little bit after that. Do a fast in the morning. Just don't eat until 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, whatever. Check the levels, see what happens. I actually will have a lot of people check their fasted glucose about 30 minutes after they get up, maybe 45 or 60, just depends on what their schedule's like. And that's just because that allows everything to stabilize, allows cortisol to come back down to normal, and basically allows you to get a more accurate blood sugar reading at that time. Now, as far as the gastric emptying goes, probably not the case unless, I suppose it could be if you had a really heavy meat containing fatty meal at night that also had carbohydrates in it. There could be some delayed response there, but probably not the case in most cases, for most people. So like I said, check liver function, make sure that's okay. In this case, A1C is okay, so that's a good thing to check. Check your fasted insulin levels in the morning, periodically on blood work. Check your liver function. Try checking blood glucose levels later in the day, later in the morning, and see how they stabilize. Some people that are insulin resistant, they might need something like metformin at night, extended release that can help because it controls the liver and glucose output there. Will it? Maybe, maybe not. A basal insulin for some people might be necessary, something like Lantus that's going to control it all night long and help control that. Well, it's not going to control the glucose output, it's just going to control the blood sugar. So that's something to think about. But like I said, check all those things first. Okay, so Cialis and other blood flow promoting peptides, do you see them solely helping pumps, or do you feel they have a place in body building muscle or elevating performance over standard pump supplements? So Cialis or Viagra or something, the PDE5 inhibitors, they can help with vasodilation. So sure, I mean, they can help promote a pump. I mean, there's plenty of people that use them for that reason. It's a secondary benefit to obviously the main use of them, what they're prescribed for, and they have other benefits, potentially lowering blood pressure a little bit, some potential benefits on prostate health. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to it, but from the blood flow standpoint, sure. I mean, they're going to help in that regard. Now, I mean, are they going to provide a ton of hypertrophy benefit? I mean, a better pump and more delivery of oxygen, blood, and nutrition to the muscle is surely going to be helpful. So indirectly, it certainly is going to be helpful. Now, is it better than any other pump ingredient? I don't know what you're referring to specifically, things like glycerol or agmatine and things along those lines. Potentially. I mean, try it, see how you react. I mean, dosage on Cialis varies so much. It's a little bit longer acting it's a lot longer acting than something like Viagra is, which people use a lot for, getting a pump just because of the short acting nature of it. So it certainly could be beneficial in that regard. All right. CBD oil usage and experience. I'm looking at it as a tool to reduce perceived stress and promote sleep quality. So, in all honesty, I have no experience with it at all. However, I have had a couple clients that have used it. They've asked me about it. It wasn't something that I told them to use. They asked me about it. I've done enough research on it, and I know enough about it that I feel comfortable saying, okay, yeah, that's fine, yada, yada, yada. Obviously, these people had also done their own research. There's a lot of information out there now. There is actual scientific literature on it. There's studies behind it, both human and animal studies, I believe. I haven't dug into all the specific studies. I've looked at reviews that compile information from the literature. There are a lot of benefits, but some anecdotal, some actually seen in the studies themselves. So as far as the perceived stress and promote sleep quality, yeah, it seems to, from what I understand, have that calming ability. Now, it is not as psychoactive like THC is, so it's not going to be on that level. However, people do report that it seems to have that calming benefit. In which case, I mean, yeah, it's going to help with perceived stress and control anxiety. Like I said, there's tons of good information on it. And dosing wise, I mean, there's a huge range in dosing too. And just like anyone, I would suggest I would start low. Start low and work your way up. Anything like that, any substance like that, anything that is going to be that's going to interfere with or interact with your mind in any way, I would always suggest starting low. Okay. How to tackle stubborn fat in females when a sensible calorie deficit is already in place. General tips to differentiate female fat loss versus male fat loss would be greatly appreciated. Okay, so obvious differences there would be maybe where they hold fat, fat distribution throughout the body, where females tend to hold it in their lower body, waist down. More fat cells there, estrogenic, the receptors. It's hormone. I mean, it's hormone related for the most part. So you can better control that hormonal environment. That's helpful. That's a really useful tool, actually. I mean, and it's not like you have to bury their estrogen, but even a female, even if they're not wanting to use actual harder substances, I mean, things like even a product like DEM that was still useful for males, it will help with estrogen metabolism, help the ratio of estrogens in the body, and it's going to potentially help with how the fat loss is distributed. So that could be something you could add in. Using stuff like yohimbine HCl to hit the alpha receptors is good for stubborn fat areas. And using those things, especially something like the yohimbine or topical products that contain topical fat loss ingredients, yohimbine's usually included in that, using them perhaps in a fasted state where they can mobilize fatty acids a little bit better to be burned. And then that, obviously that's gonna help some as well. Now, another issue too is that while you can normally just keep pushing, and obviously they're going to get lean all over, it's a lot of the gals might lose that upper body size and mass before their lower body gets lean. So being conscious of how you cycle calories, and maybe adding, if you have high days and low days and things like that, maybe trying to get some of those higher days around that upper body training, just to try to stave off the muscle loss a little bit more. Now, outside of that, I mean, males and females are, I mean, there are a lot of differences. Females have less muscle mass typically. They have slower metabolic rates because of that, and because of just their, biologically just different. They adapt differently. And I don't want to say that females adapt more than males metabolically, because I don't think that that's true, at least from my experience. I mean, there is science on both sides of it to kind of see, to show how those adaptations occur. Look up someone like Lyle McDonald and look at some of the stuff that he's done. So that's, and there is science there. But in general, another thing that people just are not doing is they're just not pushing these girls hard enough in the short term. This is a tricky thing, because I'm not, people see certain caloric numbers and they think, okay, I can't go below this, when really it might be necessary short term. And when I say short term, that's because you don't want to create some really bad metabolic adaptations and make it difficult to recover. So create good hormonal environment. Don't be afraid to push. Use things to mobilize fatty acids, site specifically as much as you can. Obviously, it's not going to be anything miraculous. We know that that's not going to happen site specifically. Can't think anything else off the top of my head that's really pokes out, because I mean, everyone's a little bit different, and everyone's going to hold fat a little bit differently. But you can also do things like cycle certain calories around menstrual cycles. If you really want to get specific, if somebody has kind of a severe menstrual cycle, keep in mind that their recovery ability around that menstrual cycle is probably not going to be as good. Their strength's probably not going to be as good. You might want to change their training a little bit. Might want to change their cardio a little bit. And their insulin sensitivity is also going to change at that time. So those are some things you can do. And beyond that point, it will come down to individuality, surely. Okay, adjusting training volume and or time during contest prep. Okay, so I I kind of like the old adage, don't change it too much. What built the muscle keeps the muscle type of thing, which is true to an extent. I don't think that it needs to be anything drastic. Like, you shouldn't ramp up any training super crazy during prep when you weren't doing it in the off season. That's ridiculous, because you're more susceptible to overtrain or overreaching, overtraining, central nervous system being burnt out at that point than you were in the off season probably. Excuse me. So that doesn't make sense to me most of the time. I can see in some cases adding additional frequency, maybe a little bit of volume, assuming that it's not all like killing yourself type training, because there is more caloric expenditure there. It's another way to burn a lot of calories without doing more cardio. But training at the end of the day is going to be used to stimulate the muscle tissue, break it down, make sure it remains where it is. So again, depends on the person, but me personally, about the extent of my training adjustment is I might add an extra day in that's going to be mostly just keeping my body moving, stimulating the tissue more. That way I know greater chance of retaining my tissue versus just doing more cardio, which isn't really going to help in that regard. And then the extra training obviously burns calories. I know some people do things like going up to 7 days a week of training. I've done that with people. It's been successful with it. But again, it's kind of depends on like where did you start and off season to now, what's your recovery ability like, what's your nervous system like. Beyond that, volume is not going to change. I wouldn't change volume session to session a lot unless it's you're adding it in just for caloric expenditure. And again, it's not going to be to failure. So maintain your strength best you can and prep, of course. I don't know if that answers the question very good. I've done it a lot of different ways. Like, honestly, I've done it a lot of different ways, and I found pretty much all of them work within being sensible. And it just seems like it always comes down to how they start in the prep and then where are they currently, like, what is their ability to recover at that point. Okay, how to elevate HDL in regards of when AI's contest prep drugs are in play, were involved. How to elevate HDL in that case? Well, I mean, here's the thing. In a situation like you're deep in there and the prep and all those things are in play, I mean, HDL is going to go down. There's probably not any way around it. Your goal should be to get it back up as quickly as you can when you're done. How much it goes down, though, I mean, you can control that to an extent. Supplementation, citrus bergamot is a big one. A lot of people are using that now. It works great. It has some science behind it. It's probably one of the better ingredients for actually getting your HDL to go up. Having sufficient fats in your diet, getting your just total cholesterol to go up, which includes HDL. That can be difficult, though, when your calories are super low and you have to pull the fat out anyhow. So, yeah, using minimal AIs. I think people overuse them in a lot of cases, depending on the situation. I mean, I think that they could maybe be controlled a little bit better. Then obviously, all the other supplementation is going to lower HDL. I mean, there's not a lot of way around that unless you're just going to use less. But yeah, so like I said, it's in a contest prep situation, so it's probably not from being insulin resistant. Because I made a post about this the other day talking about super high carbohydrate diets or just high carbohydrates over time, insulin resistance, its impact on lipids. Probably not the case here in prep. Low fat could be the case. Low fat and low cholesterol intake can have some bearing on overall output, overall lipid profile for sure. No doubt about it. And then over-the-counter supplementation, like I said, try to minimize AI as much as you can, and don't beat yourself up too bad with the orals. So outside of that, expect it to probably go down some, and then get it up as quick as possible. Your view on using HCG while blasting, any difference when blast is short or long? So I mean, there's a lot of views on this. I I'm not sold on it. Like I don't really think that it's completely necessary in the long run. If you just and a lot of doctors don't even prescribe it. I mean, even a lot of good doctors that I know. I don't know a lot of good doctors, but I mean a lot of the ones I know that I would trust to take hormonal advice from. They don't prescribe it. Um, it would have its place potentially with HCG and maybe HMG together in a fertility situation, but on a constant basis, I don't know. I don't know that it's necessary. I don't really have a good answer, to be completely honest, because most people I work with go without it, and I've been prescribed TRT for, I don't know, six years, something like that. I never prescribed it, though. I don't, I'm not too worried about the fertility thing. That's just, that's personal preference, obviously, but it's like I said, if there is a situation where fertility is an issue, then go through the protocol at that point. But chances are, outside of that, unless you plan on just using it all the time, I don't know. I'm just not a big fan. Probably somebody out there that could give you a better answer that has more experience with it. Let me see. I think that's it. All right. All right, some good questions. A couple there were kind of open-ended, so I hope you guys maybe do a little bit more research. I didn't have experience with a couple of the things there, so keep researching. And we will do it again next week, guys. Thank you.